Hello, Junior Rangers. This is Miss Jen. Today we're going to take a look at tree identification using mostly bark. Obviously, leaves are very good for identifying trees, but sometimes the leaves are not visible from the ground or they've fallen off in the winter. So bark can be very helpful in identifying a tree species. So first, we're going to start with red maple. Red maple has, as you can see, very kind of a smooth gray bark when it's young, with pointed leaves that we call lobed, and kind of three main points on the leaves, and they're usually found in wet areas like wetlands in our parks. Very common. And the bark of red maple changes as it gets older. It becomes much rougher. We see this in some other trees too. The bark does change with age. The next tree we're going to look at is called black locust. Black locust is a really neat looking tree that has these thick, rough, ropey patterns on its bark, kind of crisscross and diagonal patterns, and it has very tiny rounded leaflets that you might be able to see from where you're standing, or it might be up real high, but they're really small, kind of rounded. The next tree we're going to look at is called Sweetgum. Sweetgum is a very common tree that we find all throughout our area. It has 5 pointed star-shaped leaves and pretty rough bark throughout its whole life. Next, we're going to look at the tulip tree. The tulip tree is one of my favorites because the leaf looks like nothing else. It kind of looks like the shape of a tulip flower. Some people say cat's head. And the bark of this one does change as it gets older. It starts off kind of smooth and gray, gets some ridges, and then gets extremely rough, dark brown bark that has very deep ridges. So in this video, you can see a comparison of the two different aged trees, tulip trees. Really neat. You can find these throughout our parks too. The American sycamore is so unique. This one has really special bark patterns that look kind of like camouflage. They peel off in pieces to reveal these sort of white patches. And they have pointed lobed leaves that kind of look like a maple. And those are usually found near water. The next tree I want to take a look at is the American beech. The American beech is a really easy tree to identify because it has really smooth gray bark through its entire life. And when you see these huge trees in the woods that have smooth gray bark, that's going to be American beech. These have oval leaves with teeth on the edges. In that same family are the oaks. Now, oaks have lobed leaves and they can look very similar to one another. So we're going to take a look at the oaks together as a group and compare the bark. So first we'll look at chestnut oak. Chestnut oak has rounded edges to their lobed leaves, and they have very rough bark that is blocky in appearance, very 3D. Next is white oak, which also has rounded edges to its lobed leaves, but this bark is much lighter in color. It's definitely a gray color, and it appears kind of rough, but not very three-dimensional, kind of peeling or flaking off in pieces. And this is a big comparison to the black oak. Black oak has very pointed edges to its lobe leaves, and it has bark that looks like reptile scales. It's quite flat. Next is the red oak, which has a leaf that looks just like the black oak, very pointed on the ends. So the best way to tell these apart is certainly the bark, and the bark of red oak looks like sort of dark with light lines crisscrossing like ski trails on a mountain. Really different looking bark from the black oak. So that's one way you can really help try to identify some of the trees that are in our area that lose their leaves. We call those deciduous trees. There are some other kinds of trees that have needles, and pine trees are the most common in our area. You might find the bark of a pine tree to be very rough, and that can change depending on which kind of pine it is. Most of the pines in our county parks are Virginia pine. So that's a quick overview of some of the common trees. So I hope you can find some of these cool patterns and compare the different kinds of trees, especially with their bark patterns. And hopefully this video will help you do that. So get outside and explore and take a closer look at trees. Thanks for watching.